The rain poured mercilessly on the streets of Lagos as Alyna clutched her baby James. Closer to her chest, her long, curly blonde hair was soaked, clinging to her face as she stumbled through the wealthy neighborhood of Victoria Island. The elaborate tattoos on her arms seemed to shimmer in the streetlight, telling stories of strength she no longer felt. Her black sleeveless top offered little protection against the elements, but she barely noticed her own discomfort. All that mattered was the tiny bundle in her arms. James, barely 10 months old, whimpered softly, his small body trembling from the cold. Alyna's heart shattered with each sound he made. 3 days had passed since her husband had thrown them out, screaming accusations and rage before slamming the door on their faces. She had nowhere to go, no family to turn to, and her meager savings had run out after the first night in a cheap motel. As she walked past the grand mansions, their warm lights mocking her desperation, Alyna's legs finally gave way. She collapsed on the marble steps of an imposing villa, her body shaking with exhaustion and fear. James's cries grew weaker, and panic seized her heart. He needed food, warmth, medical attention, things she couldn't provide. Through the ornate glass doors, she could see movement inside. A figure appeared, a tall black African man with short brown hair, dressed in an elegant dark shirt. Even in her desperate state, she couldn't help but notice his striking features and the aura of wealth that surrounded him. This had to be Mathew, the businessman she'd heard whispers about in the neighborhood. With her last ounce of strength, Alyna pressed her palm against the glass and whispered the words that would change everything. "Save my baby, human, and I'll give you my body, my title, even my heart." The rain continued to fall as she waited, holding her breath, praying that mercy still existed in this cruel world. Mathew had been reviewing business documents when he heard the soft tapping on his door. What he found on his doorstep defied all his expectations. A young woman with the most beautiful, desperate eyes he had ever seen, cradling a baby against her chest. Her elaborate tattoos caught his attention, but it was the raw vulnerability in her voice that stopped his heart. "Please," Alyna whispered, her voice barely audible above the storm. "My baby is dying. I have nothing left to give except myself." Without hesitation, Mathew opened his door wide. "Come in, quickly," he said, his voice gentle but commanding. He led them to his living room, immediately wrapping them both in warm blankets from his couch. The opulent surroundings, marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and expensive artwork seemed to dwarf Alyna's small frame, but she felt the first spark of hope in days. "What does the baby need?" Mathew asked, already reaching for his phone. "Food, warmth, maybe a doctor," Alyna replied, her voice cracking. "I'm sorry to burden you with this. I know how this looks, a desperate woman throwing herself at a wealthy man's mercy." Mathew's expression softened as he looked at little James, whose breathing had grown more labored. "This isn't about mercy," he said firmly. "This is about humanity." He dialed his personal physician while simultaneously instructing his housekeeper to prepare formula and baby clothes. As the doctor arrived and began examining James, Alyna watched Mathew coordinate everything with quiet efficiency. She had expected judgment, perhaps even exploitation of her desperate offer. Instead, she found genuine concern and immediate action. The man who could have anything he wanted seemed most focused on saving a stranger's child. "Why are you helping us?" she asked as James's color began to return to normal. Mathew met her gaze, his dark eyes holding depths she couldn't fathom. "Because sometimes the universe puts people in our path for a reason," he replied, "and because no child should suffer for the failures of adults." 3 weeks had passed since that stormy night, and the grand mansion had become an unexpected refuge. James was thriving under the care of Mathew's personal staff and regular visits from his physician. The baby's laughter now echoed through halls that had been silent for too long, bringing life to spaces that had felt more like a museum than a home. Alyna had been given her own wing of the house, complete with everything she and James needed. She spent her days watching her son grow, stronger while trying to understand the man who had saved them. Mathew asked for nothing in return. Despite her desperate promise that night, he worked from his home office, occasionally joining them for meals. always maintaining a respectful distance that both comforted and confused her. "You don't have to keep us here," Alyna said one evening as they sat in the garden, watching James crawl across a soft blanket. "I'm stronger now. I could find work, get back on my feet." Mathew looked up from the business report he'd been reading. "Is that what you want?" The question caught her off guard. In the weeks since their arrival, she had felt something shifting inside her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with gratitude, and everything to do with the way Mathew's eyes lit up when James smiled at him, or how he unconsciously hummed lullabies when he thought no one was listening. "I don't know what I want anymore," she admitted. "I came here ready to give you everything I had, thinking that was the only way to save my son. But you've given us everything and asked for nothing." Mathew set down his papers and turned to face her fully. "I've been alone in this house for 5 years," he said quietly. "I built this empire, acquired everything I thought would make me happy, but it all felt empty. Then you arrived with James, and suddenly these walls felt like a home." Alyna felt her breath catch. The elaborate tattoos on her arms seemed to pulse with the rhythm of her heartbeat, as she realized that what she had offered in desperation might be exactly what they both needed, not as a transaction, but as a choice freely made. "Mathew," she whispered, reaching for his hand, "what if we chose each other? Not because of desperation or obligation, but because sometimes broken people can heal together." 6 months later, the mansion was alive with the sounds of family. James had taken his first steps in the marble hallway, his delighted squeals echoing off the walls as both Mathew and Alyna cheered him on. The transformation had been gradual, but undeniable. What had begun as a rescue had evolved into something neither of them had dared to hope for. Alyna stood in the master bedroom, adjusting the elegant dress Mathew had chosen for her. Today was special not just because it marked a year since that desperate night in the rain, but because they were making their commitment official. The elaborate tattoos on her arms now told a different story, one of survival, strength, and, ultimately, love found in the most unexpected circumstances. "Are you ready?" Mathew asked, appearing in the doorway in his finest suit. His short brown hair was perfectly styled, but his eyes held the same gentle warmth that had saved her that night. "I've been ready since the moment you opened that door," Alyna replied, taking his outstretched hand. The ceremony was small and intimate, held in the same garden where they had first truly seen each other. James, now walking confidently, served as their ring bearer, giggling as he toddled down the aisle. As they exchanged vows, Alyna remembered her desperate words from that first night. "I'll give you my body, my title, even my heart." Now, standing before the man who had become her husband, she realized she had been wrong. She hadn't given him anything. They had chosen to share everything. Her body, her heart, her dreams, and her future were no longer offerings born of desperation, but gifts freely given and received. "I love you," Mathew whispered as they were pronounced husband and wife. "I love you too," Alyna replied, her voice strong and certain. "Thank you for saving us all." As they kissed, sealing their new beginning, James clapped his hands in delight. The family that had been born from one woman's desperate plea had become something beautiful, whole, and unbreakably strong. Sometimes the greatest love stories begin with the words, "Save my baby," and end with hearts that have found their home.